Afternoon and welcome to OC Talk, the show dedicated to helping home health and hospice providers keep up to date on the documentation, diagnosis coding, OASIS, and HOPE assessment data collection issues that matter most in home health and hospice. OC Talk aims to bring you closer to reliable experts in home health and hospice and to share the latest news and information from the industry and from the Association of Home Care Coding and Compliance. I'm Jan Milliman, Director for OC, and I'm happy to be hosting today's program. Today, we're talking about the Hospice HOPE tool and diagnosis coding for hospice. And now I'd like to introduce our industry guests for this episode. Today, we are hoping to have with us Lisa Selman-Holman, OC board member. We're having a little technical difficulty getting Lisa on the line, but we're hoping she'll be able to join us shortly. And we do have Kelly Kavanaugh, an OC board member, with us today. Thanks so much for joining us and helping us to work through this topic. All right. Before we get the discussion started, listeners, if you have any questions for our panelists today, please go ahead and ask them in the chat pane, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. So Kelly, I'm going to turn things over to you from here, and we'll hope that Lisa's able to join us shortly, but we'll work through what we have for everybody. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. I'm gonna wing it. we have your best laid plans, right?
Right.
Monday. Leave it to Monday to have technology challenges, but that's fine. Okay, so getting started. This was just kind of a slide we stuck in here talking about a history, kind of where we've come with coding in general for hospice. So back in 2012, the general rule was you put all diagnosis on the plan of care, the terminal and related diagnosis went on the claim. Not really a lot of guidance, and 77% of the hospice claims that went through included only one diagnosis, just the terminal primary diagnosis. Then in 2013, we had a little bit of bump, 72% of the hospice claims included only one diagnosis, so we got a little bit better. There was some clarification that came out in 2013 that indicated virtually all services are related. Hospice physicians are the ones responsible for documenting why something would be unrelated. And then in 2014, we got a little bit better there again. 69% of all claims included only one diagnosis, so we're getting a little bit better. 2014 was the year they clarified the no debility or failure to thrive as primary. No manifestation codes are meant for primary. And so that came out in that CR 8877. That was in 2014. So then we have 2015. They came out with some clarification, CMS did, that all related and unrelated diagnosis must be on the claim effective October 1st, 2015. And they cited additional problems with unbundled services due to some of the challenges with the diagnosis codes. So that's kind of where we were. Now, where we are today, I tried to find some statistics in preparation for this call today to see where we are today, and I was unable to find that percentage. Just from personal experience and things that I've heard and felt through the grapevine, I do think we are seeing that number be much better than it was in 2014, but I don't think we're all the way there yet. I think we still have numerous agencies that are just putting that primary terminal diagnosis on their claims and that's it. So I think we do have still a ways to go. Okay, so next slide, Jan. All right, so this is just the publication that Medicare came out, the Transmittal, this change request 8877 that I talked about a minute ago. It talking about putting the principal diagnosis codes and any additional even the unrelated diagnosis codes need to be on the plan of care and the claim. So it does say the hospice enters the diagnosis coding as required, following the guidelines, of course, for the ICD-10 coding, and all of a patient's coexisting or additional diagnosis that are related to the terminal illness and related conditions should be reported on the hospice claim. So this was back from 2014. This was change request 8877. So then the next slide. So this is from March 13 of 2025, so much more recent. It's a different change request, but it's still talking about the same thing here. So ICD-10 codes, it talks about the unacceptable principal diagnosis list, which we have. But down here in the bottom of that same paragraph, we says the hospice enters diagnosis coding as required by the coding guidelines. Hospices will report all diagnoses identified in the initial and comprehensive assessments on hospice claims, whether related or unrelated to the terminal prognosis of the individual. This will also include the reporting of any mental health disorders and conditions that would affect the plan of care. So they really haven't changed. It's still a requirement to put all of those codes on there. So that's kind of where we are today. So next slide. So then if CMS is not approved enough for you, can you tell this is a soapbox item? So here's a note from CHAP. I was scoping out a CHAP. The CHAP website has a blog section, and in their blog, they talk about any comorbidities that the patient has. They're talking about all diagnoses here. So all these things that are kind of highlighted and underlined. So any comorbidities and coexisting conditions at the time of admission to hospice should be in the record available, all the information. It should be on the plan of care. Anything that has the potential to impact the plan of care. The certifying hospice physician reviews those comorbidities at the time of admission to determine which are related to the terminal prognosis. But all diagnoses must be reported on the hospice claim form, which can support up to 25 diagnoses. So there it is. The proof is in the black and white, right? So that is where I'm going to jump off my soapbox now. But I am going to illustrate one further point for you, because I know coding and putting all these diagnoses on here can have some ramifications for hospice. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you a picture of kind of what does it look like to code everything on a patient and why you would want to do that. So on the next slide, we have, so this is, I called this a tale of two charts. This is the same patient. Okay, so version A is what I would call basic coding. Okay, we got CHF, that's our terminal diagnosis. We're going to stick that on there. Oh, the patient has a wound we're going to be treating. We're going to stick that on there. And they have pain issues. We're going to be doing a lot of education and medicating for pain. So we're going to hit the highlights. These are the basics. This is what we're doing for this patient, right? Well, on the right-hand side, you got the version B, which is your complete list of exactly what's going on with this patient. So as you can see, this patient has a lot more going on than just those couple of things on the left-hand side. And it's a much better clinical picture of what's going on with your patient and why they may be progressing more rapidly, why their wounds are not healing, why their pain is not getting better, why you're struggling with, all the things and the symptoms that you're struggling with because of all these other things going on with the patient. They're bedfast, they're incontinent, they have, low back pain, and they have some, peripheral vascular, issues. And so they've got a lot going on. So by being able to put all those codes in your chart, you're able to paint that picture of exactly what's going on with your patient. So it's a double-edged sword for sure, but it is a requirement from CMS, and CHAP really kind of hones in on that as well if you're a CHAP certified agency. So just some things to be aware of out there. Okay, so I'm gonna jump off my soapbox now. Topic near and dear to our hearts for sure. Okay, so here we go. We're gonna fly through this. I'm winging it here. So this was originally Lisa's section. So we're talking about now. We're gonna jump in to actually dissect the HOPE tool itself. So there are some diagnosis sections of the HOPE tool itself, and so this is where some of these things are gonna come into play, because you're gonna be putting the answers to these HOPE items in here. And then if you don't also then code some of these things, then it's almost, you've got a disconnect situation going on. And you don't ever really want to have a disconnect situation going on when you're dealing with Medicare, because they're gonna find that out and figure that out, and they're going to do something about it, which has happened on the home care side. So your active diagnosis, your section 1, pertains to the principal diagnosis of the patient, and also then the comorbidities list. So there's 2 items there under the active diagnosis. So you've got your disease processes and conditions that impact your service delivery. We just had that in my illustration a minute ago. And so it includes the most common principal diagnosis among hospice patients. So they study data. That's what CMS does. They study data, right? They don't want us to collect data for no reason. So they are going to study it. So they've been studying what we do in hospice as an industry, and they came up with this list of the most common principal diagnosis among hospice patients, as well as some comorbidities and coexisting conditions. So they are pointing out to us as an industry what they are going to continue to study based on these items that they're wanting us to report for them. So we should take notice of this, and we should be doing our best to answer these items correctly as they've written them. So on the next slide, we will dissect some of these things. So the first item is the principal diagnosis. So they give us a list of 9 different items there that are the common diagnosis that they see. And so they're wanting us to answer these questions if we have a terminal or primary principal diagnosis that fall into these lists. Some of the things that we've seen, kind of some early on issues, if you want to call them issues, the 05, which is the COPD, that they're asking specifically for COPD here. They probably have a reason for that. They may be doing some studying on that. I don't know. But if the patient has, say, chronic respiratory failure or pulmonary fibrosis, that's not COPD. So they are asking specifically for COPD in this principal diagnosis box. So be sure you're answering these correctly. The other little tricky area is the number 6 and number 7. Number 6 is cardiovascular. And so that would be anything other than heart failure, because heart failure goes in 07. So if you're, CHF is your principal terminal diagnosis, then you would code that in 07. If it's CAD, you would code that in 06. So that's a little bit of a distinction. If you don't have anything that fits in these items, then you would use the 99, none of the above. And that is a perfectly acceptable answer. You don't have to try to make what you're doing fit into these other items. Medicare is not telling us here these are the only things by any stretch of the imagination. So using that none of the above is absolutely a valid score and answer to this question. One additional caveat here about cancer: if you go cancer, if cancer is your primary diagnosis, your terminal diagnosis, you would choose cancer. If the patient has METS sites in addition to the primary site, or they have multiple sites of cancer for whatever reason, so you're listing more than one cancer, so they have lung cancer with METS to the bones, then you would list the principal diagnosis as cancer, and you can also list your comorbidity cancer, which is the first entry on the comorbidity section, because you have 2 cancer sites. So you can list it both as your principal diagnosis and a secondary site. You would not want to list that for really anything else. So if you have congestive heart failure as your terminal, you would not also list congestive heart failure as a comorbidity, because you've already listed your congestive heart failure. If you have congestive heart failure as your terminal, however, and you also have additional cardiovascular situations, you have atrial fib, you have CAD, then you could certainly list the cardiovascular in the comorbidity list, in addition to having heart failure as your principal diagnosis list. Going on down the list, you see there's peripheral vascular disease and liver disease and renal disease and sepsis and diabetes and all these different things. You got your strokes and your dementias. So another thing to be aware of, if you list your dementia in your principal diagnosis, that includes all your Alzheimer's disease, all your different kinds of dementias and vascular dementias and whatnot. So you would not list your principal diagnosis of dementia and then your secondary diagnosis of dementia because they have Alzheimer's, and then you have all your dementia codes that go with that. Dementia just gets listed the one time in your principal diagnosis if that's your principal diagnosis. Okay, I think I have hit, oh, and the other medical condition down at the bottom, be sure you're using that if you have other things that are important. For example, one thing that's not in here is your anemia. You know, anemia is kind of a big deal. Malnutrition is another big deal that's going on with our patients. So those would be listed and captured in that other medical condition comorbidity. And you can choose as many or all, if they have all of these diagnoses on this list. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we talked about cancer being the principal diagnosis. The principal diagnosis by definition is the condition that is established after reviewing all the available information to be chiefly responsible for the patient's admission or the chiefly responsible for the patient's demise. So for hospice patients, this is a diagnosis that most contributes to the patient's life expectancy of 6 months or less if the illness runs its normal course per the clinical record information. So again, this information should be what is listed in your patient's chart. So there should be no question. So, and it is completed, the item is completed based on the patient's principal diagnosis at the time of admission to hospice. So this is all determined based on, you know, those conversations that you have, you know, with the medical director, and you guys, you know, together come up as, you know, IDG, come up with, okay, what are we going to say it's a principal diagnosis? So that comes from this, but it should be supported in your medical record and in your documentation. So that's an important piece of that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so like we talked about, coding none of the above if the patient's principal diagnosis or disease or condition is not listed in the top 9 spaces. Code 01 for all types of cancers. We talked about that. And then we talked about the all types of dementia. So Lewy body dementia, Pick's disease, all of those would go into that dementia 02 category. If you have Parkinson's with dementia, that's a little bit different because Parkinson's would go into a neurological condition, 03, and then you would code your dementia portion of that under the comorbidity section. And then note that 2 principal diagnosis response codes are related to cardiac conditions. We talked about that as well. Okay, next slide. So I think we've talked about this also, the comorbidities checklist, reviewing the medical record for comorbidities and or coexisting conditions at the time of admission to hospice. So that's again something that you should be talking about in your IDG, talking about with your medical director. This is probably where you're going to be talking about things that are related and unrelated. And so you would want to check off all of the comorbidity or coexisting diseases that are addressed in the plan of care or have the potential to impact the plan of care. So all of those things that are on this list would absolutely have the potential to impact your plan of care. Okay. Now we have heard some rumblings from providers that are having issues with their software when they're choosing, let's say, heart failure or cancer. Cancer is probably the best example. Choosing cancer as your primary diagnosis and then also cancer as your secondary or comorbidity, coexisting conditions. Some of the softwares are giving errors on that. So if that is you got to work within your software. So the best thing you can do is let your software company know that you're struggling with that and see if they can come up with a workaround. But it is a valid situation and it's a software issue that won't allow you to do that. So just FYI on that. Okay, so multiple questions to CMS. The claims versus HOPE. So per the HOPE guidance manual, this is from chapter 2, page 55 here. It talks about item-specific instructions, and the principal diagnosis is defined as the condition established after reviewing all available information to be chiefly responsible for the patient's admission. So this is the diagnosis that most contributes to the patient's life expectancy of 6 months or less if the illness runs its normal course. So we have this would be unlikely to be hypertension or diabetes, since those are not accurate predictors of prognosis. So the item should be completed based on the patient's principal diagnosis at the time of admission to hospice. So it is possible that there could be some discrepancies with coding and coding guidelines versus what you're scoring on the HOPE tool based on all the interactions with the coding rules, that you have to code hypertension before you code the CHF, but your CHF is your terminal diagnosis. So there could be some disconnects there as well. So we've got some examples on the next slide to hopefully maybe drive some of this home. So the patient has a diagnosis of end-stage heart failure with hypertension as an additional condition. So heart failure is what we all know, congestive heart failure. And so an end-stage heart failure with hypertension would be listed as I11.0, followed by the I50.84 for the end-stage heart failure. If your diagnostic statement from your provider, however, says the patient has a diagnosis of end-stage heart disease with hypertension as an additional condition, you do not code heart disease as heart failure because they are not one and the same. So heart disease gets coded to the I51.9, which we now know needs to be coded. When we code this I11.9, your hypertensive heart disease, and we code the additional code, the I51.9. So that when your diagnostic statement does not say failure, we can't code it as failure. Next slide. All right, so this is an application situation. So what we have coded on our plan of care and our claim is the I11.0 hypertensive heart disease with heart failure, and we do have a diagnosis statement that says it's end-stage heart failure, so we've coded I50.84. So what is your principal diagnosis on your HOPE? This is one of those times where some people may see this as a disconnect, but it actually does make sense if you process through it. The principal diagnosis, or your terminal diagnosis, is your heart failure. According to your diagnostic statement and your discussion with the medical director, you've determined that your end-stage heart failure is your terminal diagnosis. So you would put that on your principal diagnosis list as 07, because that is your principal diagnosis or your terminal diagnosis. So your coding has your I10 or I11.0, but your principal diagnosis is your end-stage heart failure. And then you would also list on the cardiovascular as your comorbidity, and that's where you're going to capture that hypertensive heart disease with heart failure. You would capture that under a cardiovascular as a comorbidity. So it does look like a disconnect, but it's really not a disconnect. It's just we have to follow the coding rules when we're coding, and we have to follow the terminology when we're applying these things to the HOPE tool. So I hope that's as clear as mud. So let's go to the next example on the next slide. So here again, we have what we have coded on our plan of care and our claim is the diabetes, E1122 with CKD, followed by the end-stage renal disease, which is N18.6. The end-stage renal disease is what has been identified as the terminal diagnosis or the terminal principal situation for hospice. So the end-stage renal is what you would code on your principal diagnosis list for your I0010, and that would be 09. The fact that we have to code the diabetes first is coding rules. So the hope then we would capture that diabetes as a comorbid or coexisting condition that also exists along with the terminal diagnosis of end-stage renal failure. So hopefully that's clear as mud. We have, I think, one more example on the next slide. So we have coded on the plan of care and the claim, we have Parkinson's disease and dementia. So which one goes first? Well, it's if your terminal diagnosis, after discussing with the medical director and having IGT and all those meetings, and we've all discussed it, and your terminal diagnosis is the Parkinson's disease, you code that 03 on your I0010 for your HOPE tool. And your dementia would be listed as a comorbid condition on your comorbidities list. So hopefully and that would be the same. The senile degeneration of the brain is a very common primary diagnosis in hospice. And you would code that similarly as this Parkinson's disease situation, because senile degeneration of the brain is a G code. It is part of the G chapter. It is a neurological condition. So it would be coded to the 03 senile degeneration of the brain, as far as we know right now. We are trying to get clarification on some of these things from CMS, and hopefully we'll have some clarification on down the road. But being this is a new situation, that is the best way as we know right now, because when CMS created the HOPE tool under the dementia, they included Alzheimer's disease in the dementia, but that's the only thing they included there. They didn't put example, like in number 3, we have example Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, but they just put including Alzheimer's on that number 2. So as we know right now, we would code senile degeneration as an 03 for the principal diagnosis. Okay, so now we have some interaction, hopefully, if we can get it to work.
Yes, I've got it set up, so we're testing it out live, but it should work similar to the usual polls. Cool.
So what we're going to do here, this is the audience participation time. So what we would just kind of like to see is if you will just take a quick look. This is an excerpt from an actual patient chart where we have atherosclerosis on the left-hand side. At the top, you can see the CAD is the primary diagnosis. The little headings didn't make it onto my slide, but the left-hand side is your primary terminal diagnosis, and the right-hand side is all your comorbidities list for this patient. So I'm going to give you a second to kind of read over some of those things and determine if you feel like the answers are answered correctly for principal diagnosis and for the comorbidities list on this particular patient's HOPE tool. So I'll give you a few minutes to take a look at that, and then we're going to put the poll on the screen for you just to say yes or no.
And Kelly, just let me know when you feel like you're ready for me to launch these polls.
Okay. I want to be sure everybody has enough time to kind of take a look, because there's kind of a lot going on here. And just based on what I have on the screen, there are additional, it wouldn't fit on the screen. So there are additional places the other wouldn't fit on the screen and that kind of thing. So just based on what you see, would you say this is correct? Okay, let's launch the poll.
All right, that poll is open and folks are voting.
We have no way of knowing who's right and who's wrong. We just wanted to get an idea. So don't be scared to answer, because we can't tell who said yes and who said no. So,
right, we just see a percentage of folks.
Exactly.
So nobody needs
let's just
to
take a stab at it. Don't be scared.
Right. We want to, give you this opportunity to work out your, work with this and see where we go with it. We have about 62% voted. Kelly, I don't know if you can see how those come in. Oh, no, we're getting, okay. I think it's slowed down enough. Do you want me to go ahead and
Sure.
reveal the results? Okay. I'm gonna close voting and then I can share the results.
That's
so
fantastic, because no is the correct answer.
right.
So that was awesome. You guys did great on that. So this also kind of helps us be able to figure out, okay, where do we need to go for additional webinars and things too.
Mhm.
So this really helps us. Okay, so we have another scenario, another similar situation. So I'll give you a second. This one's not quite as challenging here. So how do you feel like, is this correct? All right, so we can probably go ahead and launch this poll, because this one's pretty easy.
All right, that's distributing. We've got folks voting. It looks like it's starting to slow down. I'll give it another few seconds. And if folks are listening to this in the future on a podcast, these handouts with the scenarios will be available on the OC website, so that you can follow along and test yourself. All right, I think we slowed down enough. I'm going to go ahead and close this and we'll share the results.
Awesome. Yes, that is correct. That is not. And this is a good example on this slide. Can we go back to that slide? This is a good an example of where if you don't code any of your additional comorbidities, then this is going to look like a disconnect, because this HOPE tool gets transmitted to Medicare, then Medicare is going to get your claim, and Medicare is going to be expecting to see some heart failure and some renal disease based on your scores, and they're not going to see that in your diagnosis list. So it is going to be a disconnect. Now, what CMS is going to do about that, I can't say, but it is certainly going to be a disconnect. And then the other thing I was going to point out here on the left-hand side, chronic respiratory failure is not COPD. So we should have chosen the none of the above on that one. And the previous slide, if we can go back one more, I should have mentioned it when we were here. The reason why this wasn't right, cardiovascular excluding heart failure should have been chosen as principal diagnosis based on that CAD list. And then we have heart failure listed, but there is no additional cardiovascular diagnosis on that list. So cardiovascular probably should not have been chosen as an additional cardiovascular comorbid condition on that list on the right hand side. So that's why those are wrong. Okay, so then we have two more polls. If the audience will bear with us, we have two more things we wanted to talk about. Oh, so this is scenario 3. Sorry, we have one more voting poll as far as terminal diagnosis before we move on to the other topic. But so again, this is a yes/no vote for is this correct, based on what you see here. Okay, I think we can probably jump in.
All right, I'll go ahead and launch this. And folks are voting. It looks like we're still seeing some folks chime in. All right, it looks like we're slowing down, so I'll go ahead and close that poll, and then we'll see how folks voted on this one. All right.
Again, you guys are awesome. So yes, they did a great job. They nailed the primary diagnosis, but they kind of fell apart on the comorbid conditions. Because the comorbid conditions, we have the anemia, which could be under other. We also have hypertension, which could be under heart circulation. The anxiety certainly could be under other as well. So yeah, so they missed the boat on the comorbid conditions. Did great on coding them all, though. I applaud that for sure. So that is the correct situation. So the last thing that we kind of wanted to do today, I know we're already going way over time, and I appreciate everybody hanging in with us today. We wanted to kind of throw some things out there just as polls to kind of see where everybody is on a potential future topic. And if everybody's great with it, then maybe we don't need to make it a topic, but it could potentially be a topic. So we kind of wanted to get a feel for everybody's, how is everybody feeling about this next subject. So we'll throw out these next scenarios.
All right, here we go.
Okay, so this is talking about symptoms triggering those symptom follow-up visits. So based on what you see here, we've got pain, impact of slight shortness of breath, no. We've got some anxiety going on, slight impact, and then nausea, not experiencing. So would this trigger a symptom follow-up visit based on these scores? So let's do a yes or no poll.
Okay, let me get that going. There we go. All right, I've just launched that poll.
Get a quick vote.
All right, folks are still voting. All right. It looks like we're slowing down. I'm guessing some folks probably have had to move on. We're running a little over, so I'm going to close this one. And here we go. And here's the results. We've got 62% no and 38% yes.
So yes, that is no. So we are correct. So quickly, then we'll do the last one, and then I'll wrap it up.
Okay, let me hide those results. Move on to the next scenario here.
We have this one. This is a symptom follow-up visit. Pain is listed as moderate. Shortness of breath, we have moderate. Anxiety is slight impact, and no nausea symptoms. So would this trigger a symptom follow-up visit? Yes or no?
All right, I'm launching that poll. And we'll give it a second or two, but it seems like most folks have voted. Yeah, well, I'm not seeing any more new votes come in, so we're going to close this one. And I'll share the results. We're at 100% yes on this.
All right, so you guys are just rocking. You're awesome. Great group today. Okay, so that's really all that I had for today.
Well, thanks so much, Kelly. And thanks to Lisa for helping with the preparation of this call. And we're so sorry we had some technical difficulties and weren't able to get Lisa in as a panelist on the call. So appreciate both of you, Kelly, for pinch hitting there, and both of you for developing this, because I think it's really, there was lots of good information shared. So thank you.
I am quite certain I didn't do it to Lisa's credit or justice, but I did the best I could.
Yeah, I very much appreciate it. All right, I'm going to run us through the rest of our content for this call. We have our scenario spotlight. Last month, we gave you a scenario about a patient being seen at home. This is a home health patient for a recent hospitalization for a COPD COPD exacerbation. And during the start of care assessment, the clinician observed the patient's ability to walk at 10 feet in her living room. Upon standing, she became mildly short of breath and required frequent cues to maintain her balance. The clinician provided steadying assistance by holding her gait belt for safety, while the patient's husband walked alongside to manage the oxygen tubing and ensure it didn't catch on furniture. And the patient initiated the movement but needed significant physical support. So we asked you to choose the best code selection for GG0170I, walk 10 feet. And we had options of 4, supervision or touching assistance, 3, partial or moderate assistance, and 2, substantial maximal assistance, or 1, dependent. And the answer to that scenario is choice D, 1, dependent. And that's because the patient required the assistance of 2 helpers, 1 to provide physical support and 1 to manage the oxygen equipment. And per OASIS guidance, you'll choose 1 dependent for this item if 2 helpers are required to complete an activity, even if the second helper is there for supervision or to manage equipment. So that was last month's scenario. And because this episode was so full of scenarios and polls, we don't have a new poll or a new scenario for our December call, but we will give you one to solve next month. So you get a month off this time around with the scenarios. And now it's time for our product spotlight. This month's OC Talk is brought to you by the Home Care Leadership Summit, taking place in Orlando, Florida, May 19th through the 21st. Leaders in Medicare home health, hospice and private pay home care. This is the premier event you don't want to miss. Connect with top executives from high-performing agencies and gain valuable insights through real-world success stories. Learn proven strategies to grow your client base, reduce operational costs, boost profitability, and navigate third-party payers. You can learn more about the event at the link in your handouts or on the Decision Health website. And now it's time for What's New with OC, where we share updates from the Association of Home Care Coding and Compliance. And we wanted to let you know that if you are an OC member, you have a new webinar loaded in the OC website. If you're looking for more of a refresher on the Hospice HOPE tool overall, best practices, etc., we've posted a session from Decision Health's recent Payment and Compliance Virtual Summit that will help you make certain you're up to speed on everything you need to know to be working with the HOPE tool. And that was provided by Nanette Minton, one of our former OC board members and current OC committee member. If you're an OC member, you will find that on the website. You can follow the link in the handouts. It's in the resources under webinars. If you are not an OC member, Decision Health is actually offering this to folks via their website as well. And you can visit the Decision Health website at the link in your handouts, and you'll follow that through to download that webinar. And again, those links are in the handouts that are on the OC website under free webinars. So you look under resources, then free webinars, and you'll find the handouts that have those links. We hope you enjoyed this episode of OC Talk. Thanks again, Kelly and Lisa, for the great information today, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We hope you will join us again for our December call, when OC board member Lisa McClammy will be joining us to discuss medical necessity at research for home health. And in the meantime, if you'd like to re-listen to this episode or a previous one on the go, you can find OC Talk on your favorite podcast app, or you can also listen to the recording and access the handouts on the OC website at ocdecisionhealth.com. And if you have any suggestions for future guests, topics, or ideas about the format of the show, please send me an email at jan.milliman@decisionhealth.com. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you all next month. Take care.